Imagine that, in the silence of the night, your home, which should be a sanctuary of safety, becomes the scene of one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. A crime so brutal that it shakes the confidence we have in our own homes and in those around us. It's easy to believe that we're immune to such horrors, that these tragedies only happen in distant places to unknown people. But what if I told you that the monster we all fear isn't the stranger in the shadows, but someone we know, someone we trust? In this shocking and devastating story, I'm going to reveal how a predator hid in plain sight, deceiving an entire family, and how understanding the ignored signs could be the key to protecting those you love before it's too late. It was a cold December night in Salisbury, Maryland. Snow was gently falling, covering the ground with a soft white layer. The farmhouse, isolated on the outskirts of town, was lit only by the twinkling Christmas lights on the porch. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace offered a comforting contrast to the cold outside. Sarah Foxwell, an 11-year-old girl, was excited about the upcoming Christmas. That night, she and her younger sister, 6-year-old Emma, snuggled under heavy blankets, whispering to each other until sleep finally took them. However, what seemed like a quiet and normal night would soon turn into a nightmare. Around 3 in the morning, a soft, almost imperceptible noise echoed through the house. Emma woke up to the sound of light footsteps, but when she opened her eyes, she saw something that made her freeze in fear. A man was standing beside Sarah's bed, whispering something that Emma couldn't understand, but his presence was terrifying. Emma curled up under the blankets, pretending to be asleep, as she helplessly watched the figure take her sister by the hand. The man seemed to know the house like the back of his hand. He headed towards the back door, which led to the expansive, snow-covered yard. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind howling outside. When the door closed behind them, terror gripped Emma's mind, but the paralyzing fear kept her from screaming. She lay there, eyes closed, wishing that everything was just a bad dream. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather went to wake them up, as he did every day. When he entered the room, he found only Emma, still trembling under the covers. Sarah's bed was empty, which initially made the grandfather think she had already gotten up. But after a quick search of the house, the terrible truth began to emerge. Sarah had disappeared. The house was turned upside down in search of any sign of the girl, but the only thing missing besides her was her toothbrush, a strange detail that added even more mystery to her disappearance. The mood in the house quickly shifted from festive to desperate. Sarah's mother was urgently called, and the police arrived shortly after. The initial investigation revealed something alarming. The back door was unlocked, despite Sarah's aunt swearing she had locked it the night before. In addition, a spare key they usually kept outside was missing. This suggested that the abductor knew the house and the family's habits well, a disturbing revelation that indicated they were dealing with someone close. As the authorities tried to piece together what had happened, the tension in the air grew thicker. The first hours of Sarah's disappearance were marked by a growing sense of urgency and despair. The tranquility of Christmas Eve had dissolved into fear and uncertainty. As the snow continued to fall outside, like a silent shroud covering the scene of an impending tragedy. Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. If you're curious about how I keep my concentration, efficiency, performance, and mental health at their peak every day, I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I use daily in my video creation routine. First, breathing for sleep. This method is essential for my deep, restful nights, ensuring I wake up refreshed and ready to create high-quality content. And the best part? It's super easy to incorporate into your routine. And then there's the 7 seconds at-home ritual. This ritual is backed by 4 neuroscience studies and helps to supercharge my brain power, keeping my focus sharp throughout the entire day. Want to try these resources and feel the difference in your routine? The links are right here in the video description and pinned in the comments. Don't miss this chance to elevate your productivity and mental well-being. The hours following Sarah's disappearance were chaotic. News spread quickly through Salisbury, and within a short time, dozens of people began mobilizing to search for the girl. The small town, usually quiet, was gripped by a wave of anxiety and concern. The search initially focused around the house, where everyone hoped to find some sign of Sarah. The property's surroundings were vast, covered by fields and forests, a perfect place to hide or to get lost. The first indications that something more sinister was at play emerged when investigators noticed fresh tire tracks in the snow near the back door. These tracks indicated that the abductor had used a vehicle to take Sarah, which dramatically expanded the search area. Clues were piling up, but none led directly to the girl's whereabouts. Meanwhile, the family's desperation only grew, and the entire town seemed trapped in a current of helplessness and fear. The police began questioning family members and close friends, hoping to discover some lead that might point to the abductor. During these interrogations, an unexpected revelation came from Emma, Sarah's younger sister. Trembling with fear, she told her grandfather that she had seen the man who took her sister. When asked who it was, Emma's answer left everyone in shock. It was Mr. Tommy. Immediately, the faces of the adults present went pale. Mr. Tommy was Thomas Leggs, Sarah's aunt's ex-boyfriend, a 30-year-old man with a dark past, known to the local police because of his criminal record, especially involving women and girls. Thomas had been arrested several times for sexual assaults, but somehow he always managed to get out of prison early. Emma's revelation set off an alarm that turned the search for Sarah into a manhunt. Now with a name and a face, authorities began tracing Thomas's movements on the night before. He lived just a few miles from Sarah's aunt's house, in a small shed on his parents' property. The police knew they had to act quickly, so a team was immediately sent to the location. Meanwhile, the small town of Salisbury was transforming into a community united by fear and the hope of finding Sarah before it was too late. When they arrived at Thomas's place, investigators found a grim scene. The shed where he lived was in deplorable conditions, a disturbing reflection of the mind of the man who was now the main suspect in Sarah's disappearance. But despite the chaotic appearance of the place, they found no direct sign of the girl. Only a vast collection of disturbing magazines and DVDs, suggesting that the man had dangerous fantasies. Thomas was taken in for questioning, where he maintained a defiant attitude, denying any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He even presented an alibi. He claimed to have spent the night at a bar with friends. However, inconsistencies in his story began to emerge. He couldn't explain what he had done between 1 o'clock and 7 a.m., a time frame that perfectly coincided with Sarah's disappearance. Even without a confession, the detectives knew they were on the right track, but the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. During the interrogation, Thomas Leggs displayed a behavior that made the detectives even more suspicious. Despite the seriousness of the situation, he seemed to be enjoying himself, smirking and mocking the police officers. To the sheriff, it was clear that Thomas believed he had committed the perfect crime, confident that the authorities wouldn't be able to prove his guilt. But the police were determined to find Sarah and ensure justice was served. While Thomas continued to deny any involvement, the investigation pressed on. The sheriff ordered a thorough search of Thomas's vehicle, an old truck he often drove. The inspection revealed something crucial. On the front seat of the truck, they found Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop. Investigators believed that Thomas had used the candy to lure the girl into the vehicle. Moreover, the tire tracks at the abduction site perfectly matched those of Thomas's truck, directly linking him to the crime scene. Despite this incriminating evidence, Thomas continued to evade responsibility. He claimed he hadn't been to Sarah's aunt's house in weeks, but the investigators knew he was lying. With each new discovery, the net tightened around Thomas, but the pressure to find Sarah before it was too late kept mounting. The community, still hopeful, continued to mobilize, with over 3,000 volunteers assisting in the search. As the search intensified, Thomas remained in custody. His arrogance during the interrogation only served to increase the police's determination to find Sarah and prove his guilt. The sinister smile he wore while discussing the girl's disappearance was a clear sign that he knew more than he was willing to admit. To the detectives, this disturbing behavior indicated that they were dealing with a dangerous man, someone capable of horrific acts without any remorse. As time passed, the tension grew. Every hour that Sarah remained missing reduced the chances of finding her alive. But the investigative team refused to give up. They knew they needed to act quickly to discover the girl's whereabouts and ensure that the culprit didn't escape justice. The clues were piling up, and everything pointed to Thomas. Now all that was left was to find her. The morning of December 24th dawned cold and gray as the search for Sarah Foxwell continued at a frantic pace. Time was running out, and Christmas, which should have been a time of joy and celebration, now loomed like a dark shadow over the small town of Salisbury. Thousands of volunteers, driven by hope and desperation, combed the surrounding areas, braving the biting cold in an attempt to find any clue that might lead to the girl's whereabouts. The investigators continued to pressure Thomas' legs, hoping he would reveal where he had taken Sarah. However, the man remained steadfast, denying any involvement and even taking pleasure in the situation. The sheriff, however, was determined not to give in to the suspect's provocation. Every detail was crucial, and the police wouldn't leave a stone unturned until they found Sarah. Then, a new lead emerged. The police department gained access to the GPS data from Thomas's cell phone on the night of the disappearance. Although the information wasn't precise, the data indicated that the phone had connected to 3 different towers, creating a triangular location. This area, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's house, was mostly covered by dense forests and difficult terrain. With this new information, the search efforts were focused on that perimeter. Helicopters hovered overhead, while teams on the ground scoured every inch of the rugged landscape. The hope of finding Sarah alive was beginning to fade, but no one was willing to give up. With every step, the anxiety grew, and the silence of the forest only amplified the tension in the air. Finally, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the search groups made a harrowing discovery. In a remote area near the state border, Sarah's body was found. She was lying on her back, with her arms extended upwards, as if reaching toward the sky. The scene was desolate, and the sight of the girl's frail body left everyone in a state of shock. The investigators knew that, at that moment, the case had taken a tragic and irreversible turn. The forensic team was called in immediately, and the crime scene was secured. The initial examination revealed signs that Sarah had been brutally assaulted before her death. There were strangulation marks on her neck, but what shocked the examiners was the fact that she appeared to have been burned alive. Traces of soot were found in her lungs, indicating that Sarah was still breathing when the fire engulfed her. This grim discovery revealed the unimaginable cruelty she had endured in her final moments. The silence at the scene was palpable. Even the veteran officers, accustomed to dealing with horrific scenes, were shaken by the brutality of the crime. The hope of finding Sarah alive was replaced by a burning desire for justice. The community, which had mobilized so fervently to assist in the search, now shared in the grief and anger over the tragic loss of such a young and innocent girl. The discovery of Sarah's body was a devastating blow to everyone involved. News spread rapidly through Salisbury, and shock and sorrow gripped the town. However, for the investigators, the priority now was to ensure that Thomas Leggs was held accountable for his horrific actions. With the new evidence, the police intensified their efforts to build a solid case against him. During the analysis of Thomas's truck, more incriminating evidence was found. Strands of Sarah's hair and small fabric particles matching her pajamas were discovered inside the vehicle. These findings, combined with Sarah's DNA found on Thomas's underwear, painted a clear and terrifying picture of what had happened. With each new piece of evidence, the case against Thomas grew stronger, and the chances of him escaping justice dwindled. Meanwhile, Thomas remained in custody, still denying any involvement in the crime. But his arrogance was beginning to wane under the pressure. The detectives noticed that he was becoming increasingly agitated, perhaps aware that the net was closing in. The sinister smile he had worn at the beginning of the interrogation had now vanished, replaced by a look of unease. The investigators knew they had to proceed with caution to ensure that the case went to trial without any flaws. Despite the overwhelming evidence, there was a growing concern that the justice system might once again fail the victim, as it had so many times before. The community was vigilant, demanding that justice be served, and the pressure on the authorities was immense. The prosecution team began preparing the case with extreme care. They knew they would need all the evidence possible to ensure Thomas's conviction. The emotional impact of the case, especially the brutal way in which Sarah was killed, was a powerful factor, but they didn't want to leave any room for the defense to find loopholes. The image of Sarah, with her arms extended toward the sky, haunted everyone involved, motivating them to fight for justice to the end. Meanwhile, young Emma, Sarah's sister, was being protected by the family, shielded from as much of the trauma as possible. She was the only eyewitness to the abduction, and there was real concern about the impact that a prolonged trial could have on her. The decision on how to proceed would be crucial for Emma's future and for Sarah's memory. In early 2011, Sarah Foxwell's case was ready to go to trial. The pressure to secure a conviction was immense, but the authorities faced an ethical dilemma. To ensure that Thomas Leggs was convicted without Emma having to testify, the prosecutor decided to offer a plea deal. Thomas would plead guilty in exchange for 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, instead of the death penalty. This decision sparked divided opinions. For many, including Sarah's family, nothing less than the death penalty would suffice to punish Thomas for the horrors he inflicted on the girl. However, there was an understanding that the primary goal was to ensure he could never harm another person again. The additional trauma Emma would endure by repeatedly testifying against Thomas was a decisive factor in the decision to accept the plea deal. Thomas Leggs finally confessed to his crimes. He admitted to tricking Sarah into leaving her house with him that fateful night. He admitted to assaulting her and later abandoning her to die in a remote forest. His coldness in describing the events shocked the investigators even more, but it also reinforced the need to keep him away from society forever. With his confession, Thomas was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. There, he faced the wrath of other inmates, many of whom had no tolerance for crimes against children. In the first few weeks, he was attacked by another prisoner and suffered serious injuries but survived. Prison authorities took additional measures to protect Thomas, knowing that he would continue to be a target inside the prison. The tragedy of Sarah Foxwell left a deep mark on Salisbury and beyond. Her death was not in vain, as it led to the creation of new laws to protect children from repeat sexual predators. Sarah's law, passed shortly after her death, made the penalties for sexual crimes against minors more severe, requiring a minimum of 15 years in prison before the convicted could be eligible for parole. Sarah's case remains a sobering example of the failures of the justice system and the need for reforms to ensure that monsters like Thomas Legs never have the chance to harm again. For the Foxwell family and the entire community, the void left by Sarah will never be filled, but her memory endures, and her story serves as a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of violence against the innocent. Now that you know this shocking story, let me ask you, how many times have you ignored small signs, blindly trusting those around you? Do you really know the people in your life? Are you prepared to protect your family from a danger that might be closer than you think? Don't let complacency or the fear of confronting uncomfortable truths put those you love at risk. It's time to act, to stay vigilant, and to never underestimate the evil disguised as familiarity. If this story touched you and opened your eyes to the importance of recognizing and confronting threats, subscribe now to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. Here, we will continue exploring these issues and helping you stay one step ahead of danger. Don't miss the upcoming episodes. Your safety and that of your family may depend on it. Now that you understand the dark side that can lurk behind the quest for fame and validation on social media, it's time to reflect. Are you prepared to face the consequences of your online actions? Do you really know who is on the other side of the screen? Or are you just being lulled into a false sense of security and control? The truth is, in the digital age, the line between admirer and predator can be thinner than you think. So, how will you protect your privacy and safety moving forward? And, more importantly, how will you use this knowledge to navigate the vast online world more consciously and safely? If you want to keep learning about the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of online life and understand how to protect yourself, subscribe now to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any new stories and can continue deepening your knowledge on topics that could literally save your life. Let's journey together towards a safer and more informed life. Are you ready for this change?